Do you ever wonder why, when we smell food, our mouth begins to water? That same question Ivan Pavlov, a famous psychologist, had, which gained his interest in salivation in dogs. Pavlov's dogs was an experiment initially done based on behavioral psychology, which led to the discovery of classical conditioning. Today, I will go over Pavlov and his initial experiment, the discoveries in his experiment, and the psychological advancements in classical conditioning today. So, who is Ivan Pavlov, you may ask? And the year 1936, NREP-G published Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, which is a biography of Pavlov that explained that he began his studies in the University of Pittsburgh in the Veterinary Institute, which is where he gained interest in animals. For his studies, Pavlov would use dogs, which are known as Pavlov's dogs. During the 1890s, Pavlov began studying behavioralism in dogs and believed that there were certain things dogs didn't necessarily have to learn, like salivation from smelling food. But, according to Simply Psychology, an article I accessed June 17, 2019, while doing this experiment, he noticed that the dogs would begin to salivate just by seeing the lab assistants. During Pavlov's experiment, there were a few discoveries that became Pavlovian conditioning, and his experiment was initially constructed by a stimulus and a response. So the unconditioned stimulus was the food, and the unconditioned response was salivation. So these are two things that don't have to be learned. But by seeing that the dogs would salivate by seeing the lab assistant, he added a conditioned stimulus, which was a bell. So he would ring the bell, feed the dog, and there would be salivation occurring. But later on, he removed the food, so just by ringing the bell, the dogs would salivate. While classical conditioning has paved way for modern psychology to further understand how humans and animals learn. For example, as accessed from the New York Times by Erica Goody. For example, Dr. J.A. Garfield, a predoctoral fellow of the University College London, led a study where he had 13 subjects and they were blinded and they were told that they were learning computer tasks. But in reality, they were actually undergoing a classical conditioning experiment. So they would match various images to food odors, and they saw that those subjects would match pleasing odors with the pleasing food instead of an unpleasing food with an unpleasing odor. But after being fed a food that was part of a pleasing odor, they would not match these images as quickly as they used to as before being fed. So this study used classical conditioning by adding unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimulus while looking at the image and the odor. And the overall study is helping researchers learn more about eating disorders and understand why eating and getting food later on loses our interest, as to when we see a piece of cake, we gain interest again in the food. And that is based on Dr. Ezekiel Marcellus, as also explained in Psychology Today in an article posted in 2010, that Pavlov and his conditioning has helped pave way to understand and furthermore see how behavioral in humans and animals act by using experiments based on stimulus and conditioning. Ivan Pavlov and his dogs have revolutionized psychology and its studies today. Pavlovian conditioning, which later became classical conditioning, has helped us understand human and animal behaviors and the way that basic learning is learned in us and animals. So Pavlov's dogs and classical conditioning will remain a discovery critical to psychology.